Hi everyone, and welcome to another one of our virtual Yellowstone tour series. Today we're doing the section of road between Old Faithful, and that over there is the bridge over the road that leads to the Old Faithful area. We'll see it a little bit closer in a moment, and we're doing the section of the road once again between Old Faithful and West Thumb Geyser Basin. And even though we're in the lower loop of the park, in the southern section of the lower loop, we're not going to see that many thermal features on this section of road. We will, however, cross over the Continental Divide twice, and I'll explain to you what the Continental Divide is on the way to West Thumb. And there are a couple of other smaller points of interest. But for the rest, this part of Yellowstone has got some beautiful scenery, access to some pretty good hikes for those of you who are into hiking, and there are quite a few lakes in this area as well. We see the speed limit drop down to 25 here, and the reason for that is that there's employee housing coming off to our left. In fact, there's quite a bit of employee housing in this area, both for people who work for the National Park Service, as well as for Xanterra, who is the park concessionaire. And if we were to go up that way, we would get up to Old Faithful Inn and various of the other buildings in the Old Faithful area. You may have noticed that sign that says "Caution, Intermittent Icy Road." I would have thought that in July, and we are on the 5th of July, just celebrated Independence Day, but I would have thought by the 4th of July that sign would have been taken down. We can see a sign that says West Thumb, 17 miles away. And the reason they have that sign about icy roads is that we are climbing up over what's called Craig Pass. When Yellowstone opens in the spring, this is one of the last roads that they will open. Dunraven Pass is the last road, because it is so high. It gets up to just a little under 10,000 feet. But with this road here between Old Faithful and West Thumb going over the Continental Divide, it also gets up in height to somewhere around 8,500 feet, and there's a lot of snow in this part of the country. When we come to a bridge, we often just slow down, take a look on both sides, see if we can see any animals, particularly bears. Everybody wants to see a bear, especially a grizzly bear. And you can notice that the road is climbing up, and once again, because it's so high, there is a lot of snow on the road, and it does take longer to melt, and the Park Service generally plows this road as one of the last priorities in Yellowstone. We're going to be coming across a small series of waterfalls, and a small series of waterfalls is often called a cascade. We're going to be coming across a cascade shortly, and this one is named Kepler Cascade, and it was named by the superintendent of the park at the time. And whenever you see a sign showing that you need to slow down, it generally means that there's some feature coming up. It was named by the park superintendent at the time, Superintendent Norris, and incidentally Norris Geyser Basin was named after Superintendent Norris. But the governor of Wyoming, that's where Kepler Cascade is, the governor of Wyoming was visiting Yellowstone at the time, and I'll get back to that. You see there it says Lone Star. That's the trailhead down to Lone Star Geyser, and it's a very pleasant walk. It doesn't allow cars from what I remember, but amazingly enough, it's one of the few places in Yellowstone where you are allowed to take your bike. And Lone Star Geyser is on the trail that runs up from Kepler Ranger Station, which is down at the southwest section of Yellowstone. In order to get to the Kepler area, you do need to go outside the park through the small town of Ashton in Idaho and access it from that point. Kepler is known for its waterfalls. There are some stunning waterfalls around the Kepler area, and at some stage we will be doing a virtual Yellowstone tour of the waterfalls around Kepler. To get back to Kepler Cascade, I think I mentioned that was named by Superintendent Norris for the son of the governor of Wyoming, who was visiting at the time. I started talking about the Continental Divide and how we're going to cross over the Continental Divide twice on this road. Now, what the Continental Divide is, it's an imaginary line running in a general south-north direction. Although, as I point out, here in Yellowstone it's actually running east-west. It's not a straight line. So the Continental Divide is an imaginary line running in a general south-north, north-south direction, and it stands to reason that if it's following the highest part of the country, which it is, it's going to be paralleling the Rocky Mountain geophysical province, which is what it does because the Rocky Mountains are the highest part of the United States in this part of the country. So precipitation that falls on the west side of the divide will land up in the Pacific Ocean, and theoretically it is the Snake River that will carry the water away to the ocean. But of course the Snake River itself doesn't flow into the ocean. It meets up with the Columbia system, and precipitation that falls on the east side of the divide will land up in the Atlantic Ocean, and it will get taken there courtesy of the Missouri River. I mentioned that in Yellowstone, though, the Continental Divide zigs and zags around quite a bit, and it is in an east-west direction here in Yellowstone, and precipitation that flows to the north of the divide, precipitation that arrives and falls to the north of the divide, will land up in the Atlantic Ocean. To the south of the divide will land up in the Pacific Ocean. I know that's quite a mouthful, but if you think about it and look at the map that I'll post somewhere in this video, you'll see what I mean. There is a very cool lake right at the top of the divide. I mentioned there were some nice trails, some nice hiking trails in this area, and that's the parking lot for one of them. This, by the way, as I mentioned before, is the 4th of July weekend, and this accounts for a lot of the traffic that we are seeing in the park. The first time that we come across the Continental Divide here on this road, there will be a lake called Isa Lake, and Isa Lake is one of the few lakes that actually flows in two directions. Water that flows out of the lake to the north, as I mentioned before, will end up in the Atlantic Ocean. South, theoretically, will get into the Pacific Ocean. You can see that for the most part on this road there's just trees, and more trees. For those of you who've watched others of these videos, you'll know that the predominant tree in Yellowstone is a lodgepole pine tree. And all of these that we're seeing over here are lodgepole pines, although there are some Doug firs and spruce trees and elms scattered amongst them as we start climbing higher up. You can see over there to the right some of those. The lodgepole pine trees were given their name because you could cut them down and use them to make your lodge or your cabin or whatever building you were constructing, just using the one piece of tree. That's how straight they are. In fact, the trees that were used to construct Old Faithful Inn were lodgepole pine trees as well. And at the time they were building it, the architect and the builder, the contractor, sent workers out into the forest to find freak or giant lodgepole pine trees, the really big ones. And the height of those trees is what determined how high Old Faithful Inn was going to be. You can see that we are climbing up, and we are coming to another sign telling us to slow down. And this is where we're going to run into Ice Lake. There's part of Ice Lake flowing off over there. Here it is again here. Now, I haven't been up here for a few weeks, but the water lilies are starting to grow, and that's the beauty of Ice Lake. You come all the way to the top at this elevation, and you can see that there are water lilies. Here is the Continental Divide sign, and you'll notice that we're at 8,262 feet. And these are some of the water lilies that, amazingly enough, you'll find right on top of the Continental Divide on Ice Lake. That's the road to West Thumb. That's the road back to Old Faithful. And this is the lake that I mentioned to you that actually flows in two directions. The north to the Atlantic Ocean and the south to the Pacific Ocean. Boy, aren't those yellow flowers amazing? We're pulling out from the parking lot at Ice Lake on the Continental Divide, and we're continuing on our trip towards West Thumb Geyser Basin. Once again, on this part of the trip, there's not going to be any thermal features or a lot of what you might expect to see in Yellowstone, some of the features that make Yellowstone so spectacular. But still, this is a very pretty road with the trees and the mountains as we drop down into the valley and then climb up again to the next time that we cross the Continental Divide. As we climb up here, there was a sign that said Shoshone Point. There's a number of things of interest about this area. Number one, this is halfway between West Thumb and Old Faithful. In addition, Shoshone Point is an overlook of Shoshone Lake. Shoshone Lake is the largest lake in the United States that's not accessible by road. You have to hike in there. I've never been there myself, but a friend who was a leader in the Boy Scouts organization told me that they used to go camping there pretty often, and it really is a very scenic and delightful place to be. Those mountains that you can see in the distance are off on the other side of Yellowstone Lake, and West Thumb, of course, is located on the shores of Yellowstone Lake. West Thumb has quite some geological significance. As those of you who've watched others of these videos may know, Yellowstone's lower loop coincides more or less with the caldera. The caldera is that gigantic hole in the earth that was created the last time that the Yellowstone supervolcano erupted, and depending on which research you read and which books you take in, that occurred about 625,000 to 640,000 years ago. there was this gigantic hole in the ground, which of course over the millennia has filled in. But what is interesting about West Thumb, and here we are at the Continental Divide again, you'll see this time it's a little higher, 8,391 feet. What's interesting about West Thumb is that scientists believe that the West Thumb area was created by another volcanic explosion, another volcanic eruption, which created a caldera. So West Thumb, scientists believe, is actually a caldera within a much larger caldera. Is starting to drop down, and pretty soon we're going to see Yellowstone Lake through the trees. Just see Yellowstone Lake off in the distance there through the trees. You'll get a much better view of it in a moment. There's the lake right there, and those mountains, if you can see them in the background, have still got snow on them on the 5th of July. As we come around this next corner, you'll see there's a place where you can pull over and park on the right. And if you do, be careful when you cross the street, but there's a wonderful view of Yellowstone Lake through the trees. Just park coming up on the right in a moment. Park right over here. We've got those wonderful views of the mountains. And then there's an elevated view of Yellowstone Lake and the West Thumb area off to the left. If we were to continue on this road, we would head south towards the south entrance of Yellowstone National Park, cross over the Rockefeller Parkway and then enter the north entrance of Grand Teton National Park. We are, however, going to continue on the lower loop and turn left in a moment, where the signs tell us that West Thumb Geyser Basin is. West Thumb is behind these trees over here. Thank you for joining us on another one of our virtual Yellowstone tours. If you enjoy our series, please consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Otherwise, see you in Yellowstone.